Welcome to Man Rampant. It's wonderful to have this episode with Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk is the CEO and founder of Turning Point USA and chief cook and bottle washer there.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Let's start with that. How did you become conservative? Did you have a conversion experience to conservatism on the Damascus Road, or did you grow up into it organically?
It started, I was a Christian first. I gave my life to the Lord in 5th grade, grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. As a side note, fun thing about being from Illinois is we have term limits in Illinois, a little different than most states. It's 1 term in office, 1 term in jail for our politicians. But no, in 5th grade, I made the most important decision of my life. I made Jesus Christ the chairman of the board of my life and welcomed him into my life. And every decision from there was always instructed by my faith. I was always a conservative in the sense where I respected history. I thought that liberal ideas would always go too far. Mind you, I was young. I was 5th, 6th, 7th grade. But as I grew and I started to study more, I grew very passionate about these ideas. So when I was in high school, Obama really kind of came onto the scene from Chicago. That was a very big deal to kind of be, to see Chicago's own Obama kind of rise to fame and rise to stardom. I was a contrarian voice to that throughout high school. And, graduated high school. I was going to go to West Point, didn't get in. I convinced my parents to let me take a gap year. It's been 13 gap years, and the only campuses I visit are like Washington State University down the street. That's why I'm dressed down, by the way, everybody. I just did 3.5 hours at Washington State. Literally, we just ended like 20 minutes ago, so excuse my casual dress. And simply put, I visit college campuses so you don't have to.
Very good. So how did Turning Point start?
Really, it started at first diagnosing a problem. So as a senior in high school, leading into my first year at Turning Point USA, I saw that young people were going very much in the liberal direction, nothing new, but so dramatically that there was not a counter opinion or a counterpoint ever presented. And I had this crazy idea that conservatism can be spread and communicated in a much more appealing way than it otherwise has been, especially on college campuses. And I would go to campuses in 2013, 14, 15 with no money, no connections, no idea what I was doing, with literally just a card table, just arguing with kids. No film crew, just like arguing with kids. And I would get like one kid, that I would find a conservative. We'd start a Turning Point group from that. So it's like pure grassroots, right?
Okay.
I mean, it wasn't as if I was selected for this or there was some committee that thought it'd be a good idea. It was gritty. It was very hard to convince people of this. I'm an entrepreneur. And thanks to the Lord's blessing and His providence and His grace, we started to see it grow and we started to see it start to gain some traction. Met then businessman Donald Trump in 2016. We became friends, got to know his son. Obviously, he won in 2017. We started to continue to grow as these campuses became more and more Marxist, secular islands of totalitarianism, quite honestly. And, Turning Point USA was kind of standing against it. And then this last 2 years was just God's really His greatest blessing to us. I believe we stepped up for the moment. Really, there were very few people that were willing to stand by President Trump when all that was happening, the indictments and all of kind of the lawfare around him. Especially no one thought that young people could move in President Trump's direction. That was incredibly contrarian. And so we first kind of stepped up to bat just out of loyalty. And I said, look, the president's been a friend. He's had our back. He's been treated terribly. We're going to try to organize young people for him because that's what we do. And we started to see something, and I know you want to talk about this throughout the discussion, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, where all of a sudden the crowds on campuses weren't just growing, they were more diverse, and they were very masculine of guys that were otherwise not politically affiliated at all. We started to see this young male undercurrent. They were thirsting and they were hungering for a different cultural, political, and eventually theological and spiritual perspective. And yeah, look, long story short, glory be to God, we did 55 campus stops, myself personally, over the span of 14 months. We reached over 3 billion people on social media. Maybe you've seen the videos on TikTok, Instagram, X, and YouTube. Polling, independent and liberal polling, shows that our organization was the most consequential in moving young people's opinion. And of every demographic group, Baby boomers actually went 3 points more in Kamala Harris's direction. Younger voters over 20 points in Donald Trump's direction in November. And praise God that we were able to play a small role getting him back in the White House.
So your approach from right out of high school on, right? Were you self-consciously building an organization, or were you just doing you and your card table?
Yeah, it was card table. I mean, I had to learn kind of what credit and debit was. I had to learn how to write a check. I mean, and I tell this to young entrepreneurs all the time, that it's okay if you don't even know what you're doing. In fact, it's actually better if you don't know what you're doing, because then there's nothing to unlearn. Right. And that's really important, by the way. And college teaches you all this rubbish and this nonsense that you have to deprogram. And so I had this passion, and I had not just a passion. I tell this to young people all the time, don't just follow your passion, follow your passion and your skill. So those two things. So you have to find something you're good at that you enjoy doing. Because if you just follow your passion, you can end up doing something you're honestly not very good at. And by the way, the Bible tells us, do not follow your heart. Bad idea. Do not follow your heart. Do not do that. Multiple warnings. Do not do that. And so as an entrepreneur, I started to learn, this is what a 501c3 organization is. This is what a 501c4 organization is. I can have employees. That's amazing. I mean, you start to learn this stuff, and I have a lot of energy. I always try to find problems and solve them. And God just put so many people in our life at the right time where they were ultra generous, where they didn't have to be. And they poured into us where it would have just defied human reason.
So there's several aspects to this. You obviously believe in hard work, visiting all the campuses. You can't just dial it in, right? You've got to go. You've got to talk to people, engage with people.
Out of obedience, yeah.
Okay. So there's that aspect of it. Also, tell me about Turning Point's ground game. Is that something you're committed to? Knocking on doors, talking to people. What's your philosophy of the ground game?
Yeah, and so especially I live in Arizona. I love Arizona. It's a great state. If you're ever there, come on by our headquarters. We'd love to have you. We were really bothered by what happened in the 2020 election, that Donald Trump didn't get the electoral votes from Arizona. So we said, hey, can we do the ground game better? So we hired well over 1,000 full-time people on the ground in Arizona to do what we call ballot chasing, which is the grassroots grittiness, hustle work of politics. And it ended up working. Donald Trump won Arizona by nearly 200,000 votes. We moved younger voters in a great direction, but this just wasn't young voters. It was also knocking on doors and chasing ballots of unaffiliated, low-propensity voters, welders, electricians, carpenters, firefighters, police officers. And this is going to be a through line of our conversation. We did something that the media thought was insane. In fact, if you ever have spare time, you could look at all the articles attacking Turning Point about a year ago, making fun of our strategy. You know what our strategy was? We're going to win by finding millions of young men that have never voted before. And the media said, that's insane. Roe versus Wade was just repealed. It's the year of the woman. Women are going to rise up in big numbers. We're like, actually, we think men are going to shock the world. And how did I know that? It's because I don't just view things through looking at data and looking at charts. That's helpful. I actually go to college campuses and talk to thousands of people, and I can see how they're processing information. I can see as I'm dialoguing. And I started to realize...
See who shows up.
See who shows up and see why they're showing up and what they're saying and how they're communicating. And what I realized very quickly, we were a little ahead of the curve, is, my goodness, there is a course correction of young men that want to resist and reject the hyper-feminine, dare I say, toxically feminine culture that has taken over American society.
Go ahead and say that.
No, yes, the toxically feminine. No, this is you're that kind of pastor. I forgot. Got to remind myself. And so we seized on that in the best possible way, and understand, of course, at its core is a spiritual problem. And spiritual problems manifest themselves into cultural problems that then become political problems. So it's kind of a three-pronged issue, but of course, at the core, it's spiritual. And so my critics say, Charlie, politics, waste of time. You should only talk about the gospel. Look, the gospel is the most important thing, but you know how many people we have led to Christ by first talking politics? Because the law is a school teacher to Christ, as it says in Galatians 3. The law can show you towards Christ. It's a guardian of Christ's message. And I see this happen every day on campuses. And so there's something very profound happening. It's actually accelerating. It's not slowing down. Young men are becoming more and more conservative. They're more and more hungry and thirsty to get involved in the local church. We could talk about young women because they present an opportunity. Let me put that mildly.
All right.
but I do believe women will follow if men lead.
Okay. So in this, when you go out to these campuses, you said earlier that conservatives were not presenting, your part of your motivation was that conservatives were not presenting the message in a way that was attractive or compelling, right? But your style is confrontational, right? Is there something, and mainstream or conservative Inc. believes in PR, believes in winsomeness,
Yes.
which translates into giving away the store, right? How do you combine what's clearly an effective and winsome strategy that is simultaneously confrontational?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
It's a great question. Look, I fail at this all the time. I try to be better at it than not, which is how do I have love and truth on a college campus, have an open mic for kids that need to hear it? And the honest truth is I try to do as Jesus did in the public square, which is to show mercy where appropriate, but also have uncompromising truth standards. And so the old way of doing things on campuses, and this is where it's so wrong, and I can't believe for a short period of time I used to believe it, and then I dismissed it, which is that, okay, kids are liberal, therefore we have to go present a more liberal message to them and water down our beliefs. In reality, what they enjoy more than anything else is like the most provocative truth claim that you could say is like, men can't give birth. Like, whoa, you can get 2,000 people into an auditorium for saying that, right? What I'm getting at is that I'll give you an issue that I'm an unapologetic advocate of, despite the fact that I'm in the political minority, which is to fight for the unborn. I am resolutely pro-life in every possible circumstance, and that's not popular.
Right.
But the crowds we draw around that is amazing. And so I think to myself, I don't know if I would actually get as much attention if I was just kind of like an uncompromising squish, but like, well, I think it's just a woman's, my body, my choice. That's actually not that interesting because they could hear that from their local professor.
Right.
What's all of a sudden gets their attention, like, did he just say that there should be no exceptions for abortion? Tell me more. Step up to the mic. Tell me why you're wrong. And then all of a sudden we can use the Socratic method to ask questions. When does life begin? What is the process of human development? By what moral standard are you appealing to? What is good? What is evil? What is right? Why is it bodily autonomy? Why does the size, level of development, environment, or degree of dependency of a baby matter of its moral worth? And like, I've never heard this before. And I don't want to try to brag too much on what we've kind of stumbled into here, but I think this is the direction that online content and young people are demanding. Less kind of just like being in a studio reading a teleprompter, and get out in the streets, find the best ideas, let them kind of confront each other, and let anybody say anything they want at any time. And it's been an amazing success, praise the Lord.
C.S. Lewis observed somewhere, I forget where, that when unbelievers or atheists become Christians, they almost never become liberal Christians. Right.
That's true.
They think something like, if I'm going to do something crazy,
Let's go all in.
I'm going to go to the deep end. I'm going to go to Christians, the kind of Christianity where they actually believe things. And Eugene Genovese, who was a Marxist writer who became a Christian later, said that during his atheist days, he said, whenever I was in the presence of a liberal Christian, I always had that deep assured feeling that I was in the presence of a fellow unbeliever. Right.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to ditch my unbelief, why would I move to a murky form of it?
Yes.
If I'm going to be a Christian, I want to be a Christian. And you've seen that play out, like the stark claims of Christ.
Absolutely. And we are seeing more interest for the gospel, more interest for spiritual things. Because think about the world that so many of these kids at University of Idaho or Washington State were raised into. Just the last 4 years. Every secular institution failed them, and some religious, by the way, but every major power center has lied to them about almost everything that's involved them, from COVID to the vaccine, to mask mandates, to the economy, to speech, to gender norms, to sexuality. So you have the most depressed, suicidal, alcohol-addicted generation in history that is also the most secular. Something here doesn't necessarily fit. So all of a sudden there's this group of us, and I include you in this, Pastor, and I'm a big admirer of yours, that is speaking truth all of a sudden into this broken culture, and they're like, I've never heard that. That makes sense. Because nonstop, they get this nonsense on campus. And you have to wonder, like, why do they fight so hard? There were tons of protests today, but there were even more supporters. Understand, we had nearly 3,000 kids there today at Washington State University. Don't believe me? It was was anyone there, by the way? Did anyone? You double dippers. We got super fans. But it was a big crowd. Wouldn't you agree, guys? It was really big. And so, that's funny. There were protesters there the whole time. Fine. Why are they so threatened by me coming up there for 3 hours? Open mic. So let me get this straight. Washington State University gets them for 4 years. I might get some of them for 3 hours. Because they know that I, in 3 hours, can undo the damage of 4 years of garbage with one sentence, one question, one truth claim. And that's why they have to try so hard to not let me speak.
Right. They are threatened by not just truth claims, but by truth claims that are true.
Well, of course, yes.
Which big advantage.
Yes. Claims of truth, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah. So, is abortion the most volatile topic? What is the?
I would say, yeah, and this is also where I differentiate from the old way of reaching out to young people. And I fell victim to this for a very short period of time, and I snapped out of it, which is only talk about economics. Don't talk about the cultural stuff. They actually want to hear about the cultural stuff. No one is telling these people to save themselves from marriage. No one is rejecting the premise that you shouldn't actually, like, abortion is not like a normal thing. And it pains me to say this, but some of these kids on these campuses, they think like getting abortion is like getting a haircut. It's not a joke. There is zero teaching of the severity and the complexity and the inhumanity and the butchery of what goes into this action. And it's not like they're like, oh yeah, it's no different than like a cosmetic plastic surgery.
Right.
And so abortion is probably the most frequent topic I get, but the one where there's like a pathological, like they get very upset is transgenderism. And that's, I'm deeply uncompromising on that one as well, where I believe God created man and God created women, and period, that's it. End of story. That if you have gender dysphoria, it's a brain problem, not a body problem. We should not have these treatments for anybody, period, especially not minors. And I think personally, the medical establishment has not earned our trust to have any treatment for anybody of any age for this, period. Whether you're 25 or whether you're 30, I think there should be a full suspension of quote-unquote gender-affirming care for people in this country. So all that to say, transgenderism gets them very worked up. And then almost inevitably, they will then come, because I will say things like, it's a blessing to be here, God bless you, you know. So eventually, they're like, wait a second, are you like one of those Christians? And then, yeah, which by the way, I was telling the pastor here, I think I win the award for the greatest podcast contrast in a 24-hour period. You guys ready for this? So tonight, I'm in Moscow, Idaho with Pastor Douglas Wilson. Last night, I was in Los Angeles doing 2 hours with Bill Maher. And I kid you not, it was probably the hardest podcast I've ever done. Not just because he is wickedly smart, like he is very smart objectively. No, I was impressed by his capacity to understand things from a very, very militantly atheist perspective. He was smoking weed the entire time, and I don't like fragrances, okay? Let alone cigarette smoke or vaping. So I've never smoked marijuana, but now I guess might say I've like secondhand smoked marijuana. So here I am, like we're trying to debate the Council of Nicaea, and I'm like, I kind of feel kind of funny right now. And so, excuse me while I abstain tonight, Pastor. I'm like, I've had enough. But anyway, I'm saying it's the greatest contrast one could ever imagine, right? From Bill Maher to Douglas Wilson. And so that's really something. But all that to say, the Bill Maher discussion or the campus discussion is all about like, whoa, gets to spiritual matters. And again, what happens politically is just a manifestation of the spiritual, and we must be unafraid to engage in spiritual.
So I'd like to get to that point in a minute, but just a quick demographic question. When you get pushback on transgenderism, does most of it come from guys or girls?
Girls.
Yeah.
That's a great question. It's 90% women.
Yeah. And
which is like, I'm sorry to interrupt, that should not make any sense because they're actually the greatest victims of it.
Right. And then But when you look at the transgender world, someone who's grounded in the Christian worldview and what the Bible teaches about human sexuality and humanity, these people are broken puppies. They're just
They are.
they've been lied to and starved for spiritual truth, and they've sort of come to the end of the road. And I think there's a maternal instinct that kicks in, where the women.
That's interesting.
The women feel like to oppose transgenderism is like kicking puppies, and you need to feel sorry for them. I think it's that we've been here in Moscow. We've been talking about the toxic empathy or untethered empathy, and I think that that's what this is. The women have been trained to be empathetic, no judgment. You cannot make judgments because that is pharisaical or legalistic or harsh, critical, and so they just don't want to do it. And the women have bought into that propaganda more heavily than the men have.
I've never heard anyone say that. That's super smart, and I think that's right. I would add to that. Women are norm enforcers. They always have been. Women look at what the consensus of the times are, and they're very good at enforcing whatever the norm is. By the way, when Christianity was the dominant view of America, it was women that were enforcing that. So the women were the ones that were the backbone of American Christianity, especially on the hyper-local rural level all throughout the country, and that deserves to be credited. Women generally are far more agreeable than they are disagreeable. And when it comes to transgenderism, there is high social cost, which women do not like risking social capital as it is, for opposing transgenderism. It's a very, very high social cost. You get isolated, you could not be part of the tribe. Women are far less likely to not want to be part of a community than men, just as a fact. I think the maternal instinct is right. In addition, though, transgenderism is the logical endpoint of feminism. If you understand feminism. Feminism is this idea of no distinctions between male and female sexuality. The first claim of Gloria Steinman in The Feminine Mystique is essentially that like men can do everything, women can do everything that men do, and I need to be liberated from this oppression of being a homemaker, right? I must be liberated above this. And so fundamentally, transgenderism is the climax of that. After 50 years, it's like, okay, you say everyone's the same, then fine. Men can become women and women can become men because there's nothing actually intuitively or instinctively different between the sexes.
So you've alluded to this a couple times, but not in these words. The late Andrew Breitbart said that politics is downstream from culture. And then we've taught for a number of years now, and culture is downstream from worship. Mm-hmm. You become like what you worship. And because evangelical worship in North America is anemic and compromised, and it's like a room full of cotton candy. It's like there's not much weight to it, not much gravitas. And so that kind of worship has led to the corruptions in the culture that we see. So worship is upstream from culture, culture is upstream from politics. And you can't go down to Congress and say, vote for this or do that or do the other thing, when the juggernaut of a continent full of anemic worship and compromised, corrupted culture is behind this measure, whatever it is, pushing. Would you agree with that?
Yes. I mean, as deep as you want. I mean, what we worship in the West are the pagan gods of old that have just largely been repurposed. And I mean, I know you do a great job of this because I read your book, Christendom, and I am a Canon Plus subscriber as well, which is honoring the Sabbath. It's actually my next book, all about the Sabbath. I think it's the most forgotten commandment by the Western Christianity, by far. And it is designed primarily for worship.
Right.
And so you think about it, we've basically eliminated honoring the Sabbath. It says very clearly, for 6 days you shall work, and for the seventh day you shall rest. Very clearly, that seventh day is designed for worshiping God who created the heavens and the earth. Bereshit. It literally is for that purpose.
Right. And we are up a creek when we go to talk to unbelievers about their violations of this commandment or that commandment.
Bingo.
Because they say, well, what about you guys?
So yeah, you guys are working on Sunday or you're working on whatever day, I mean, you consider to be the seventh day. I'm not legalistic about that at all. I will say, though, that if you can't pass the Sabbath test, you are in violation of the Sabbath. It's very simple. If I walk into your home on the Sabbath, can I tell? Or does it look like every other day? Holy means separate in Hebrew, and we're supposed to keep the Sabbath day holy. And if the Sabbath is not different than the other 6 days, then you are violating the Sabbath.